Hello everybody, welcome to the week 4 review. Hope everybody had a good weekend. I'm going to try to make sure I set the privacy settings properly on this one so people can actually watch it and I can't make a technological idiot out of myself again. So last week we did some light reading of Descartes' Meditations, no problem there, easy to understand. But anyway, I think we got through it and we got the general ideas, and I'm just going to run through some of those general ideas really quickly here, and then we're moving on to Pascal and Hume this week. So, all right. So, because we hadn't read the first two meditations before jumping into the third meditation, I just wanted to give us a little bit of background on the meditations and sort of Descartes' project. And Descartes' project was essentially to doubt everything that he has since in his past taken for granted to be true, and to doubt everything to see if he could find one single thing that was true. And of course the thing that he finds in the first meditation, which we'll read a bit later in the course, is I think, therefore I am. So it starts with, I'm having thoughts. I'm having a thought of whether I can believe anything or not. So obviously thoughts must exist, and if thoughts exist there has to be something that does the thinking, because thinking isn't actually, it's a verb, a predicate. So that implies that there has to be a subject that goes along with that. So that's Descartes' rationale behind that. But then he starts to question, even though I'm a thinking thing, it's possible that there could be some infinitely powerful being that's deceiving me. So what I need to do is I need to inquire into the nature of this infinitely powerful being and see if this being exists. If the being exists, is its nature such that it would deceive me? So that's how he gets into his, his exploration, his argument for God. And he starts with ideas or types of thoughts, and he goes back to this idea of the cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. And he calls this a clear and distinct perception, which we hear a lot, and it's sort of the crux of Descartes' argument is this idea of clear and distinct perception. But that's supposed to be something like I think, therefore I am, which he thinks is just, matter-of-factly true. It's just, if you think about it long enough, you'll see that it's necessarily true. 2 plus 2 equals 4. Triangle has 3 sides. So he starts to look for other things that may have these qualities, and he arrives and he thinks that arithmetic and geometrical truths like 2 plus 2 equals 4 and a triangle has 3 sides and things like that are of the same type of this cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. So he looks at other types of ideas, other types of thoughts. Ideas, he gives the example of the man, the chimera, and the angel, God. Volitions, which essentially are choices. It's something that you choose to do. Like, I choose to drink my tea right now. So that's a volition. Emotions, fear, and then the last category of thoughts or thought processes are judgments, and Descartes makes it clear that the judgments are the only things that can actually be true or false. Now, when you make judgments about things, there can be 2 justifications for your judgments. The first is nature, and Descartes says it's a spontaneous impulse to believe that the world outside me resembles my thoughts, and that's a natural, what he calls a natural justification. The second justification is what he calls the natural light. And the natural light is essentially this idea of a clear and distinct perception that Descartes talks about. Clear and distinct truths, he calls them. So then he goes on to ask, so I have these ideas in my head, where do they come from? And he gives 3 potential places that ideas can originate from. One is innate, that I'm born with them, that they're part of my nature for some reason. Another one is external, or adventitious, as he calls it. Essentially, there's something outside of me, and that thing impresses a perception on me, and it gives me an idea of that thing. And the third way that ideas can come about, or they can be invented by me, like chimera, for instance. Okay, so then he gets into this whole causal thing, which essentially drives his argument. He says that the natural light tells him that the cause of something has to have at least as much reality as its effect. And this leads to his idea of the principle of sufficient reason, where he says, something can't come from nothing, and the more perfect cannot arise from the less perfect. And that's where Descartes gets into his distinction between formal reality and representative reality. And this is, essentially how he makes his argument for the existence of God. Formal reality is the reality that ideas possess in and of themselves. So when we were talking about Platonism and nominalism earlier, and we couldn't decide, whether things like numbers actually existed and things like that, perhaps a good way to think about it that Descartes gives us is this distinction between formal and representative reality. So things like the number 3, Sherlock Holmes, Pegasus, things like that, they do exist in formal reality. That is the reality that an idea possesses in and of itself. So that's how Descartes defines formal reality. He also has another category, which is representative reality. And representative reality is the reality that the object possesses in and of itself. So it's the reality that the idea that the thing that the idea is representing has, the object itself. That's representative reality. Now, the interesting thing about those ideas with Sherlock Holmes and Pegasus and things like that is Descartes tells us that formal reality there must be at least as much representative reality as there is formal reality, because he thinks that the representative reality tends to be the cause of the formal reality. And if you go back to his idea of the principle of sufficient reason, he says the more perfect can arise from the less perfect. So that leads him to this generic argument, which he plugs God into. The argument goes, if there's an idea that possesses so much representative reality that exists outside of me, then I can't be the cause of it. Everything must have a cause. Therefore, if there exists such an idea, if there exists such an idea that possesses so much representative reality that exists outside of me, something must exist externally of me to be that cause. And then he goes on to claim, if I can't find any such idea that has that much representative reality, then there's no proof that anything exists externally to me. So he starts to question whether there could be anything that does have this amount of representative reality. And he looks at various things. He looks at the idea of man, animals, angels, sense perceptions. And he ends up with the conclusion that the only thing that possesses enough representative reality that it could not have been created by me is the idea of God. And here's his argument, essentially, for why he could not have created the idea of God. He starts with the premise that God is perfect. God is a being possessing all perfections. I am imperfect. Therefore, the idea of God doesn't come from me. And this goes back to his idea of causality, where he says, the more perfect cannot arise from the less perfect. So then he plugs God into that initial argument. And, of course, the important thing to remember is that he claims that this idea of God as a being possessing all perfections is one of these clear and distinct perceptions, which gets him into a lot of trouble. So he says that I have this clear and distinct perception of God. And then he starts asking, well, where could this clear and distinct perception of God come from? Did it come to me through the senses? He says no, because oftentimes when things arise from the senses, they come unexpectedly. For instance, if I'm standing next to a fire, heat comes on me. I mean, it's not unexpected to us after it happens repeated times, but the first time it happens, we're not expecting it. And he thinks that the idea of God is different than that. He asks, could we have invented the idea of God? And he rejects that because he says, look, we have this idea of God as the most perfect being, and because, by definition, God is the most perfect being, we're not free to change that definition. And if you invent something, you're free to manipulate it as you wish. And then the last thing that he considers is, God, who is the creator, placed this idea of God within me. So here's his final argument. I couldn't exist with my nature being a thinking thing and having this concept of God with all perfections if God did not exist. And he defines God as the representative reality of the idea of God. So, you have this representative reality, this infinite representative reality that mirrors this formal reality perception that I have of God.